Hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Andy Frisky. I'm a senior dream curator here at DreamBank, and on behalf of our team, we're thrilled to have you with us. For those of you who have attended virtual or in-person events in the past, welcome back. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'd love to take a moment and introduce you to DreamBank. So here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. That's why we created DreamBank, an inspirational community destination and digital experience that is dedicated to dreamers everywhere. Our mission also includes our commitment to bringing forward critical conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're honored to showcase speakers who represent the vibrant and varied dimensions of our ever-growing community of dreamers. DreamBank recognizes that we learn, grow, and dream on the homelands of the Hooçak, Menominee, Kickapoo people, a place their nations have called Teejop since time immemorial. We acknowledge these indigenous communities and have stewarded this land through the generations and pay respect to their elders past and present. We thank you for taking the time today to listen and learn alongside us. Now, we'd like to introduce you to our speaker, an alumnus of the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education, Aaron Birdbear. It started in March 2020 as the inaugural Tribal Relations Director at the University of Wisconsin-Madison after 20 years and one graduate degree at UW-Madison. Birdbear previously supported American Indian and Alaska Native students at UW-Madison and previously worked to advance the integration of Native American Indigenous Studies into PK-16 education throughout the creation of WisconsinFirstNations.org. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will let you take it from here.
All right. Can everyone hear me well, I hope?
Yep, you're coming through.
Oh, great. Hani chata haipi, Aaron Birdbear ga hini gaide. And it's just a little brief words of welcome in the Hooçak language. I am not Hooçak. I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, and my mother's a member of the Navajo Nation. But it's always wonderful to learn the local language, little greetings or some phrases in the indigenous language that has been spoken in this place for time immemorial. And so just wanted to give a shout out to the people of the Sacred Voice, the Hooçak Nation. Their incredible language is so important to our continent. And so I just wanted to say hello in the Hooçak language. Once again, we're here to just kind of illuminate just how incredibly special of a place we're fortunate to call home for those who live in the greater Madison region. The Hooçak have called this place Teejop for time immemorial, and Teejop means four lakes in their language. And we're aware of the four-lake chain on the Yahara River today that kind of is referenced in the language of the Hooçak in Teejop. And so we have 12 Native nations of Wisconsin today. So it's just helping us be aware of the many Native nations who call this particular state home today. And so I just wanted to remind us about the many different Native nations, although we're going to be focusing on the Native nation whose treaty lands are here in southern Wisconsin, what is now Madison, Wisconsin, the Hooçak Nation. I wanted to recognize that there are 12 Native nations of the state of Wisconsin, 11 of which are federally recognized and one is unrecognized for a complicated history here in Wisconsin. But that's just a subset of the 574 federally recognized Native nations across the United States today who speak 169 different languages. So all continents are diverse in special places, and there's many different viewpoints, just as we think about the cultural and linguistic diversity of other continents like Europe or Asia or Africa. That same kind of continental diversity applies to this continent in the form of the many different cultures, languages, and governments of the tribal communities and nations in the United States today. And we have a Hooçak flag raising coming up tomorrow here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So tribal relations in my office. I just wanted to give a shout out that we're really still trying to learn much about this place in ways that we do not know for those of us who are not indigenous to the Western Great Lakes. And so the Hooçak Nation are partnering with the University of Wisconsin-Madison in a flag raising, which is a cultural activity of the Hooçak. And we just wanted to kind of share how we as an educational community are trying to enrich ourselves and learn more about this place from the Hooçak, who have been generous partners in sharing with us information about their perspective on treaties, on language, on culture, through numerous presentations and partnerships with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And tomorrow's a really exciting day where we'll be participating in Hooçak culture, as flag raisings are something the Hooçak Nation does for their own communities and in partnership with local schools and local governments. And just to give us a sense of how special this place is, I have a little bit of a display here that as a timeline. If we extended like the full human story of this space that we call Madison today, or the Hooçak have called Teejop, we can see that 1848 forward is the little blue arrow on the very end. If we converted the 12,000 years of recorded humanity here in what is now Madison, Wisconsin, we would see that the creation of Wisconsin and the use of English as a primary form of communication here in Teejop and Madison is so new. English and the kind of U.S. Property relationship to the land in the form of the state of Wisconsin and the city of Madison is literally the last 1.4% of the human story of Teejop. That 98.6% of the story of this space is in a language other than English, in a worldview other than kind of the worldviews that U.S. citizens have, and European and European American peoples might bring with them. But 98.6% of this humanity of what we call Madison, exists in a language other than English. And so I think it's really important to recognize how new English is as a form of communication here, as is the kind of new culture that's been enacted in this place, considering how long humans have been living here and deeply connected to the abundant resources throughout this place. And if we took a snapshot at any given time, we would see different communities here in the state of Wisconsin. So here's just a snapshot from the 1760s, the pre-treaty indigenous nations and territories of the Western Great Lakes that are represented in a trade map, the 1760s riverine trade map in the Wisconsin's past and present historical atlas. And so this just reminds us of just the many different peoples and nations and languages and cultures that have been established and functioned so well here in the Western Great Lakes for so long. And that's where we kind of are going to think about how we understand this space, the extraordinary cultural center of Teejop, in that indigenous nations and cultures and peoples have creation stories. So we have these really wonderful parables that explain kind of value systems and how we came to build our knowledge, working with our plants, working with our teachers and relatives, the living world around us of plants and animals. And so I think about creation stories and how indigenous people have been so deeply connected to this place for such a long period of time that their cultures and languages are kind of manifestations of being deeply connected to the land for such a long period of time. And indigenous peoples have a kinship relationship to land, a kinship relationship. So if you view the living world of plants and animals as your teachers and relatives, that's a kinship relationship. It's a little different than the kind of property relationship the United States has to land, which doesn't necessarily situate the living world of plants and animals as equals with us in some way, shape, or form. So in that sense, indigenous people have creation stories about how they came to be as peoples in this continent. The Hooçak and the Menominee both have creation stories that are situated here in the Western Great Lakes. Mogashoots, the Red Banks, the first village of the Hooçak, is up by what is now present-day Green Bay. And Menominee have the creation story of them coming to be on the headwaters of rivers in northern Wisconsin. And so we can kind of see emblems of these colonization stories around town in Madison, Wisconsin. We have one called the Blackhawk marker from the class of 1888. And the Blackhawk marker is kind of reminding us of the successful ethnic cleansing of Illinois. The Sauk peoples are from what is like Rock Island, Illinois, and they were forced to be removed from Illinois following the 1830 Indian Removal Act. And so here we have a little bit of the Indian Removal Act policy of ethnically cleansing all indigenous peoples living east of the Mississippi to be forcibly relocated west of the Mississippi. And we see that kind of marker acknowledging the successful colonization of Illinois and removal of the indigenous peoples from Illinois by celebrating the kind of Blackhawks retreat and pursuit. The verbs in that marker on the left, the Blackhawk marker by the class of 1888, the two verbs are retreated and pursued. So we know that those are not honorific terms. And so it just kind of reminds us of how our own student community 100 years ago was reminding us as a contemporary society about the contest for the Western Great Lakes itself. And then we have another marker about the American character, which kind of talks about the rugged individualism that kind of defines a sense of identity for U.S. citizens. And it has this line about beliefs about our nation's history that helps define what it means to be American. And an important component of that definition of being American, or at least the American mythos, is the hard experience of colonizing the rugged West, to which I always ask, hard for whom? So it's really kind of important to see these colonization stories as they're kind of written. So the United States kind of talks about how it came into possession of different territories and the way it exerted its force to claim those territories in some way, shape, or form. Whereas indigenous peoples have creation stories versus colonization stories. And so indigenous peoples have a very different sense of their connection to place and how they make meaning for themselves in this beautiful world called Teejop. And so if we fast forward a little bit, here we have a kind of ancestral lands map indicating the borders of the treaty cessions of the native nations of the Western Great Lakes. So these are the recognized borders through treaty with the United States of land cessions from these indigenous nations to the United States. We can see the 10 million acres of the Hooçak Nation in brown, and there's a red circle on the map that indicates where we are located in Teejop, the 4 lakes. We can see the 4 lakes are the 4 blue items within that red circle on the map. We can also see the 10 million acres of Menominee Nation, the vast tip of the Ojibwe universe that spans from Saskatchewan to New York, as well as the Potawatomi peoples who are kind of in southern Wisconsin. We also have the Dakota Nation has treaty cessions and treaty lands within what is now the state of Wisconsin. So we can see kind of the indigenous nations were recognized through treaty. But it's a little different than the indigenous nations we would have found in the 1700s during the fur trade economies. And just reminds us that snapshots and pictures in time, we sometimes find different nations. But this map represents the treaty land cessions of these native nations with the United States. And so it's just a great reminder that Native American nations are political minorities. We're not, although we've been racialized in the United States, since we have these treaty-based relationships with the U.S. government that we see through land cessions and other kind of establishment of reservations and other things, it just reminds us about the sovereignty of Native American nations. And so this map really shows us sovereignty in a very visual form of treaties and their outcomes. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about the the 7 spoken languages by the 12 Native nations of Wisconsin. So if you've never seen these languages represented, how they're kind of spoken in their own or represented in the ways that are the Roman alphabet and linguistic diacritical marks can represent their languages. We see the languages of the Potawatomi, the Hooçak, the Munsee, the Mohican, the Menominee, the Ojibwe, and the Oneida. And so we think about those 12 native nations of Wisconsin. These are the 7 languages spoken by those indigenous nations. And so it's just really wonderful for us to acknowledge and see these languages that we often might be unaware of. And I talked about that 98.6% of the human story of Teejop was spoken in a language other than English. And so we probably would have heard Potawatomi and Hooçak and a few other languages spoken in these regions as people came together for trade and for other reasons. So just really wonderful to celebrate the indigenous languages here of the state of Wisconsin. And then the Hooçak call themselves the people of the sacred voice. And we can see how they represented themselves on their website. There's an image on the right side of the screen that shows a graphic that is taken from the front page of the Hooçak Nation website. And we can see that in their reference to themselves, Hooçak Nation, people of the sacred voice. And when they talk about sacred voice, it's really the importance of their language to our continent. And so like Latin is the parent language for the Romance language family of Spanish, French, Italian, a few other languages. Hooçak is the parent language of the Siouan language family. And the map on the left side, the red areas indicate kind of the regions of the Siouan language family. And my ancestors, my relatives who are Mandan and Hidatsa, are on the kind of about 2/3 of the way across this red kind of section on the continent. So my ancestors live about 1,000 miles away from here. And so that's the vast reach of this language. You know, Mandan and Hidatsa are languages related to Ho-Chunk in the same way that Spanish is related to Latin or French is related to Latin. Mandan and Hidatsa are both related to Ho-Chunk as the parent language of the Siouan language family. So when they talk about people of the sacred voice, it's really about the significance of their language to this continent. And the Ho-Chunk people are one of the few indigenous nations of this continent who are named after their language because of the incredible influential aspects of their language on this continent. So just when we think about people of the sacred voice and what they mean by that, we can see just how influential this language has been for this continent for such a long period of time. And just a reminder that, humans, there's some geographical or geological events that were preventing humans from living here in the Western Great Lakes longer, at least, than the previous ice age. And we have evidence for humans living in what is now Wisconsin for 13,500 years, the oldest discovery being down by Kenosha and Racine. There was a mastodon discovered there from 13,500 years ago, and it was the butchering marks on the skeleton that were very exciting. That was indicated that the human activity was happening here in what is now the state of Wisconsin 13,500 years ago. And so the last ice age really kind of prevented humans from establishing themselves in much greater abundance and numbers here until the ice retreated and the land firmed up enough for humans to move in, and humans moved right in. And from the Ho-Chunk Nation website, about themselves and their self-description on their own website, it says, please understand, Ho-Chunk oral tradition states, we have always been here, and more than likely, we always will be here. Our history is not told in history books, but spans back beyond possibly 3 ice ages. The Ho-Chungra have traditional lands that go from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois. So even reminding ourselves about how the Ho-Chunk understand themselves and their story and their connection to this place. It's just an oral tradition in the way that indigenous nations through creation stories and many other stories help us transmit our values and understand ourselves as indigenous peoples here on this continent. And just kind of reminding us, a little bit more about Ho-Chunk worldview and their understanding and connection to this place. I always tease, settlement is such an interesting word of colonization. People have lived here for 10,000 years, as the Menominee have, or time immemorial, as the Ho-Chunk have. Does that not count as settlement in some way? It's interesting to get a sense of what counts as settlement to some people. But just reminding about even naming, right? I talked about that 98.6% of the human experience of Teejop in a language other than English. And the name Lake Mendota, which is next to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, that name Mendota was created for a land speculation brochure, and it was quickly kind of created as a name. And the people thought that it was an Ojibwe word, and it's not quite an Ojibwe word. And then they created a series of rhyming names off of it. So Monona, Kaganza, Wabisa, Mendota, and just kind of reminding us about the kind of newness of naming of this space. But every single body of water or kind of region that was really important had a name in indigenous languages as well that we don't often know but are becoming more aware of today. And so it just kind of reminds us about the incredible kind of names of the waterways that the Ho-Chunk have for this region. And in particular, the one that stands out for us at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is Wonkshikomiqua. And Wonkshikomiqua is what the Ho-Chunk referred to, what we now call Lake Mendota for the most part. And it's a story about their connection to the water and their worldview, and how humans are connected to that particular lake. And so it's a really beautiful story of connection and recognition of the animacy of the water itself, the spirit that the water contains. And so Wonkshikomiqua is referring to the human connection to that lake. A really powerful cultural story to learn. And we can see the other names for the bodies of water in this region that comprise Teejop, the 4 lakes. Ho-Chunk worldview really hold a sacredness for water, and they really cherish the springs, lakes, and rivers as living beings. And so it's just really important for us to understand a little bit about the cultural connection of humans to the waterways around us. And when one has a kinship relationship to waterways that have their own animacy. It's a very different relationship than the one we have today, or how we even conceive of our relationships with the living world around us. So just really special kind of components of culture here in Wisconsin. And then here, if we look more closely, when we speak specifically of the Hooçak Nation and the treaty cession borders for the lands within Wisconsin, we can see 3 treaties comprise 10 million acres, a little over 10 million acres of what was the Hooçak Nation prior to the United States expanding into what is now the Western Great Lakes. So we see in 1829, there's some dates on these particular sessions that are pink, orange, and tan. Ignore the purple sections with the Dakota Nation. I mentioned the Dakota earlier. But we see the Hooçak land cessions and through treaty in 1829, 1832, and 1837. So in very short order, in a period of 8 years, the Hooçak cede 10 million acres to the United States. And those treaty rights are still enjoyed by U.S. citizens, so treaties go both ways. The Hooçak ceded their territories. They did so under the threat of violence or coercion or outright fraud. The 1837 treaty is considered completely fraudulent today, and the 1829 treaty has fraudulent components as well. 1832 treaty was done under coercion of violence. The largest massacre in Wisconsin history happened 6 weeks prior to the 1832 treaty, when Blackhawk and the Sauk peoples were fleeing the ethnic cleansing of Illinois, and they attempted to go through Wisconsin and go across the Wisconsin River. And they were met by Navy gunboats and military, and several hundred people were murdered on the banks of the Mississippi in Wisconsin. And that was just 6 weeks prior to the signing of the September 15th, 1832 treaty for this region, what is now Teejop. So in very short order, the Hooçak cede 10 million acres to the United States government, but it's either coercion or fraud that kind of was the centerpiece of these kind of land transfer from the Hooçak to the United States. And we can see a lot of the village life of the Hooçak in these maps. We can see Old Turtle, Four Lakes, and Broken Arm, which are now the cities of Middleton, Madison, and Monona. So it's a lot easier to establish a place for living if the prior occupants have spent a long, long period of time making it a good place to live. And so we can see the incredible villages of the Four Lakes and Old Turtle, Four Lakes, Broken Arm, and Mammoth a little further down the way. Just reminds us of the robust life of the Hooçak people and a very, very high quality of life here in the Four Lakes, considering the incredible abundance and resources available through the lake chain system in this region. So we are just in an extraordinarily special place that has been home to people for such a long period of time. And we can see here through the land cession maps, the many villages of the Hooçak throughout this region. And then this is just another quick snippet. This is from Uncommon Defense, Indian Allies in the Blackhawk War by UW-Madison history professor John Hall. And John Hall's map just kind of shows us just the many villages, once again, of the Hooçak world, at least in the time of the 1800s. And we can see there's a little red arrow at the top all the way by Lake Winnebago that served as neutral ground, a meeting place for many different nations to come together. We can see the Hooçak villages all the way up near their original first village of Mogashoots, the Red Banks. And we can see, so all these Hooçak villages kind of beginning where Lake Winnebago is today, going all the way down into northern Illinois near the Rock River. And so we can just see the kind of many villages that were kind of documented, at least in this book in the 1830s, in John Hall's text about the Blackhawk War. So it just kind of reminds us of just the incredible kind of lived life of indigenous peoples in this region, and that it wasn't an empty wilderness by any stretch of the imagination. It was an extraordinarily populated area full of lots of people engaged in trade, in mining, in farming, just an incredible amount of robust economic activity happening here in a very, very wonderful place. And then when we kind of go back to that timeline I started with about the 12,000 years of human experience here in Teejop, and why the University of Wisconsin-Madison talks about 12,000 years as a community here, we can see this map of what was once a large lake, a singular large lake 12,000 years ago. The last ice age put a lot of water onto the earth as the ice retreated and was melting. And so we had a little higher water levels here in Madison. And if you ever wonder why, the Isthmus Floods, we can see that the isthmus was a chain of islands in the 12,000 years ago. So if you wonder why there's some low-lying areas that have some drainage issues, we can see clearly of where those low-lying areas were. So instead of 4 lakes, we had one large lake 12,000 years ago. And the triangles around this lake indicate sites of human activity from 12,000 years ago. So there's a triangle near what is now Picnic Point on this map. And Picnic Point was technically underwater 12,000 years ago. So kind of like the previous shoreline of Picnic Point area, we find human activity 12,000 years ago. And so that is our kind of receipts and hard evidence of how we understand how long humans have been here. And we were really excited as a state that news has made national news of the 1,200-year-old canoe that was just dug up, retrieved from the about 30 feet of water near Picnic Point. And so it just reminds us once again of just how many different wonderful humans have called this place home, and the incredible technologies they developed to thrive in this region. So this just reminds us of the 12,000-year story and how we have the evidence for describing that story. And then, as we pivot to kind of the really kind of aspects of culture that we can visit today in our greater region, I wanted to at least show some pictures of these items because they're often hard to conceive of without an image. But we have these monumental art burial sites that were built beginning 2,500 years ago up to 700 years ago. And initially, these were in conical and linear form, so like a hemisphere or a wall of earth. And then there was this progression where these burial sites began to be created in the form of representational figures. And so here we have a couple representational figures that are illuminated on the upper right picture, which shows a bird and what looks like something that has 2 tails and 4 legs and a head. We call that the double-tailed water spirit today. And the image on the left shows the double-tailed water spirit kind of emerging from the snow a little bit. So we can see the double-tailed water spirit in the snow, which is on Observatory Hill. And unfortunately, you can't see it as well. There's a tree, and to the left of that is the bird effigy that's on the hill as well. There used to be many more mounds in this location, but unfortunately, they were destroyed with the creation of Agricultural Hall, the building directly above the snow in that region. And there were additionally 3 more conical, linear, and effigy mounds on the face of Observatory Hill. So there used to be a pretty significant group of effigy mounds, conical and linear effigy mounds on the Observatory Hill face and the western crown of Observatory Hill. In the lower picture we can kind of see rakes that have been, leaves that have been raked off of the bent-winged goose that is near the natatorium here on campus. And the map in the lower right shows the representation of the bent-winged goose that are around Teejop, the 4 lakes. And of the 20,000 of these monumental art burial sites that were created, one would only find the bent-winged goose here in Teejop. And so the bent-winged goose, in many ways, is a signature effigy of the 4 lakes. And we have one of those at the UW-Madison campus still today, although it's been altered a little bit in archaeological investigation. It's still, both of these monuments are so significant in their specialness and uniqueness that both are now nationally registered historic sites. And so the double-tailed water spirit and the bent-winged goose, considering their cultural significance, are very special items. And so they are now registered as protected places in the National Register of Historic Places. Just a reminder that all these are still burial sites. Humans are interred in these locations if they're unexcavated. And so it just reminds us that we have to treat the conical, linear, and effigy mounds with a lot of reverence, the same reverence we provide for other cultures who inter their ancestors in some way. And so we just happen to be an extraordinary region that is full of used to be over 1,200 of these monumental art burial sites here in the city of Madison. And we can see the kind of vastness of the system in this particular image. The conical, linear, and effigy mounds that were built between 2,500 and 700 years ago, approximately, are in 41 of 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. So 41 of 72 counties. So what a vast reach of culture and expression was happening on the landscape. And so these are maps from Amy Roseborough and Robert Birmingham's Indian Mounds of Wisconsin, 2nd edition, that just kind of remind us of how special this landscape is and how many different peoples have thrived throughout this region and the cultural expressions they were building on the earth in honor of their ancestors and important people in their communities. The map on the right shows the Four Lake region. There's all these small little black dots that represent clusters. So I mentioned just briefly before this slide that the observatory hill used to have 3 mounds, and probably at least a dozen of these conical linear and effigy mounds on the observatory hill region. So each dot here represents a cluster of development, and so we can see the many different clusters of conical linear and effigy mounds that were created in very, very important locations, meaning there's a lot of functional placement for these. And so we can see just how well developed this region was for over a few thousand years as humans were making cultural expressions in remembrance of important people in their societies. And then if we zoom in on just one of those dots, so here we are at the Woodland Shores group, and the Woodland Shores group is a really instructive group. It just shows us a little bit about what kind of cluster would look like. And this one's important because it shows us kind of a clan organization in some ways, in that we have the upper clans, those that fly in the sky or above the earth. We have lower clans, those that walk upon the earth. And then we have kind of the underworld and the water spirits that might be below the surface. And so we can see the birds on the left and the bear and the canines, and then the water spirits on the right. So it just really reminds us of kind of a worldview and clan system that we still see in operation today. And just for the sense of scale, the bird on the left had a wingspan of 200 feet, so a pretty large representational figure on the earth. That's a burial site where someone was interred. And it reminds us of how much energy was being put into creating these monumental arts. It's not easy to build a bird shape that's 4 or 5 feet high. And think about, they did it basketful of earth by basketful of earth for the most part, sometimes hauling different colored soils over large distances in designing these particular representational figures. But the largest bird effigy on Lake Mendota had a wingspan of 624 feet. So these birds would be about a third of the size of this larger representational figure that was built on the northwest shore of Lake Mendota. And the largest bird effigy ever discovered in Wisconsin on the Wisconsin River had a wingspan of 1,300 feet. So talk about an amazing kind of cultural object that was created in remembrance of someone in their society. So Madison in Wisconsin, we're in the cultural heart, the very center, a supercluster of these amazing monumental art, cultural expressions that were built upon the earth such a long time ago, and we can still be mystified by their beauty and the connection that humans had to the living world around them. So just a really special place. And then if we look at the Isthmus, this is a drawing from 1836 of a survey crew who came through, and it's a highly impressionistic drawing, not likely not to scale, but it does remind us of just how much development the first U.S. kind of people exploring this region encountered. And so the left side of the map is basically the Capitol Hill to the Edgewater Hotel, or kind of from Capitol Square to Wisconsin Avenue to Langdon Avenue on the left side of the map. And the map is basically a diagram of the isthmus. And on the far right side, there's a lake that says Third Lake, which is meant to be Lake Monona. And we can see the Yahara River connecting to what we call Lake Mendota. And so this is the isthmus. And in the middle is kind of the center of where East Washington is located today, where the DreamBank location might be. And then I also mark that near Tenney Park today is where the village of Teejop was located. The Hooçak often created villages next to marshes and wetlands because of the immense resources contained within them. And so just reminding us about the village of Teejop, near where Tenney Park is located today, a DreamBank being located, but that, the hills and elevated regions of the isthmus were completely inscribed with these massive monumental arts built upon the land. We can see all the linear mounds, which are like little walls that run down the kind of hillsides toward the lake. We can see these many areas that were made level all over the kind of isthmus. One wonders what they were doing in those spaces when they wanted to make these really level areas for their own cultural activities. And this says, there are many, many mounds in this region, over 100 mounds in this region. And so it just reminds us of just how much thought, effort, and care people put into developing and designing the isthmus as a place of remembrance for people within their society. So this is, once again, an impressionistic drawing, but it clearly conveys just the significant amount of development that the Isthmus used to hold prior to the creation of the city of Madison, and the streets and neighborhoods, which for the most part erased most of these cultural monuments from our community. We still have many of these monuments in town, but it just reminds us of how many there really used to be prior to the development of Madison. And importantly, there's just a fantastic kind of history of Madison that we've kind of forgotten, in that, you know, the logical feature of Madison used to be called the dividing piece of earth that was about 8 stories high, and it ran kind of along Park Street over toward the zoo here in the city of Madison. And so that yellow section on the picture kind of represents where one would have found the dividing ridge not that long ago. And that an 8-story high, very steep walled kind of section of earth. And on top of it, there were lots of conical, linear, and effigy mounds as well, since it was such a striking geological feature of being this very steep wall of earth kind of jutting out that was formed during the last ice age. And then there's some photos that we have of people on top of the dividing ridge, and some of the kind of representational and burial sites that are on the dividing ridge. So we have a little bit of evidence of the dividing ridge, but the dividing ridge was entirely torn down for the gravel contained within it. Madison needed a lot of landfill. Somebody saw probably some profit in that material. And so what used to be the most significant geological feature of the city of Madison, the dividing ridge, was completely destroyed in the terraforming of Madison. And so it's just something that people maybe not recognize, of how changed and shaped and Madison has become from the place of Teejop before it. So just something to consider, that, you know, Madison has always been a very special place, and some of the most striking kind of features of the place have been changed with the creation of Madison as a modern U.S. city. So something just to be aware of if you didn't know about the dividing ridge and how special it was. And on top of the dividing ridge was a many different kind of conical and linear and effigy mounds, as the indigenous peoples of this region felt it was a very important spot as well. And this just kind of reminds us that today, you know, Madison, Wisconsin is thought to be the most archaeologically rich university of any in the United States. So the Madison, Wisconsin is an extraordinarily special place. And we as a university community are now learning how to teach and learn about the significance of this place as a cultural center for thousands of years. And we can see the many burial sites, habitation sites that dot the lakeshore of campus property today. So that would be Wonkshuk-Omikala, the lake is known to the Hooçak, or Lake Mendota as is more commonly known to us. And, you know, Picnic Point is basically one large habitation or workshop site. There are many habitation sites starting from the base of Observatory Hill running over toward Picnic Point. So just an extraordinarily special story to tell when one is likely the most archaeologically rich campus in the United States. And it's something we're really celebrating as a campus community today, because it really helps us fulfill the learning goals we have for students on our campus. They need to know about the complex physical, natural, and cultural worlds in which they live. And what better story to tell than this, that we're the tip of 12,000 years of humanity here in this space. And there have been many different languages and cultures expressed in this space over time. This is just a reminder, just a little bit of notes from our archaeological survey of campus, that Eagle Heights and the natatorium were on 8,000-year-old village sites, and Picnic Point is at least 3,000-year-old village site, and the Porter Boathouse could have been a nationally registered historic site for the significant village that was there, Kronsage, and that unfortunately some of the burial sites of conical, linear, and effigy mounds were destroyed underneath the creation of North Hall, Bascom Hall, Muir Knoll, Agriculture Hall. So just kind of reminding us about how we started erasing a little bit of the cultural landscape here with the creation of Madison and the University of Wisconsin. This is just a little more facts and figures that from our archaeological survey that just says, oh man, beginning 13,000 to 10,000 years ago, ample evidence for humans living here. People keep living here. We're starting to see some kind of differences in culture and kind of technology being introduced over time. And then we really see starting, about 2,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago, these monumental art burial sites being created on the landscape. And so just the extraordinary specialness of this place. We don't often recognize that the ecosystems have so dramatically changed here in what is now Madison, Wisconsin. It used to be a bur oak savanna and tall grass prairie. And so the bur oak savanna is now an extinct ecological system here in the state of Wisconsin. There are small patches of oak savanna being restored, including here on campus. But if one thinks about Hooçak culture and Hooçak worldview, they were connected to an ecosystem that is no longer present here. And their language and culture often carries a lot of this information about their connection to these ecosystems and the many living beings of this ecosystem. And so we've had a very changed landscape from what is oak savanna and prairie systems in southern Wisconsin that were created and stewarded by fire ecology over a long period of time. And University of Wisconsin-Madison has returned to fire ecology as a form of stewardship, since it was so effective in helping with invasive species and undergrowth in other areas. The Hooçak were avid fire ecologists, as they were incredible agriculturalists, producing so much corn here in the Four Lakes region, and helping renew the earth and open it up for farming and hunting. Fire ecology was a tool. And just through that kind of acts of stewardship, the National Geographic summarized in 2018 that although indigenous peoples comprise less than 5% of the world's population, they steward and protect 80% of global biodiversity. And the Hooçak were trying to make a really biodiverse and healthy habitat for all living beings in this space through their stewardship. And when we look at kind of the mound locations and we superimpose, if we compare them to the ecological systems that were around them, we see that, the mound systems that were created in 41 of 72 counties really align with the oak savanna and prairie systems of the state. So if we look at where you'll find these cultural expressions on the earth, we see they align with the open spaces of the state. And a lot of those open spaces were created through human intervention over time. One of the ways we often don't understand or have kind of missed the cultural landscape that's hitting in plain sight is the nature of settler colonialism itself, and that the goal of all settler colonial societies is replacement. So the organizing principle and goal of all settler colonial societies is replacement, and that means the replacement of indigenous peoples. And so often settler colonial societies are not educating their citizens to know about what is being replaced, such as the significance of the Isthmus or the incredible kind of burial sites that are all around the Four Lakes system. And we kind of see this ethos when Wisconsin was created. The territorial seal on the left describes the motto of the creation of Wisconsin, which is civilization succeeds barbarism. So not a lot of respect for the indigenous peoples of this place in the initial conception of Wisconsin. And then we see the kind of motto that was created forward, and we see indigenous peoples are no longer represented within that particular diagram. There's an indigenous person on the left side of the territorial seal, presumably leaving the frame to the left, with new people coming in from the right or the east in terraforming the land in that kind of cartoon graphic novel about the terraforming of Wisconsin. And then we see the tools of extraction in the modern kind of seal today. So once again, kinship relationship to land and creation store versus property relationship to land and kind of mineral extraction. Indigenous dispossession happened really fast. So within 82 years, millions and millions and millions of acres were ceded through treaty or seized or just taken in different forms without ratification of treaty from indigenous peoples. And so although manifest destiny is usually used to describe this kind of process of colonization, we can see how quickly it occurred through this schematic that shows treaty making in land cession over 82 years. And then, Madison still today kind of really doesn't as deeply acknowledge the Hooçak and their culture as we do the Blackhawk War, which is about the Sauk peoples who lived down in Rock Island, Illinois, and were trying to flee the ethnic cleansing of Illinois. And the Blackhawk conflict came through Madison for a pretty short period of time, a few weeks. And we have lots of different monuments about the Blackhawk War, many more so than about the Hooçak themselves. And so it's just kind of reminding us about, how we fixated on the ethnic cleansing of Illinois more than we have about understanding the space we live in ourselves. And part of that is trying to tell the complex story of ethnic cleansing of this space, that for a little over 40 years, the United States attempted to forcibly remove the Hooçak from Wisconsin. And that kind of violent upheaval of the Hooçak world, we're still trying to heal our relationship with the Hooçak after this violent episode. And as we continue to heal our relationships, hopefully we'll learn more and more and more about this space in ways that we don't understand it currently. And so this kind of history of ethnic cleansing in the state of Wisconsin has interfered with our ability to understand this place. But hopefully we're all working toward reconciliation, revitalization, and respect of Indigenous nations so that we can learn more about these spaces we live in today. And that just reminder that the ethnic cleansing processes of Wisconsin were not unique. They happened throughout the entire continent with the passage of the 1830 Indian Removal Act that said all Indigenous peoples east of the Mississippi must live west of the Mississippi. So here we see that kind of symbolic representation of that movement of peoples, that forcible movement of peoples out of their ancestral lands into new lands. And we see the outcome of that in the 2010 census data, where the map shows the darker the green, the more Indigenous peoples live in those counties. And so we see the eastern seaboard of the United States has been mostly ethnically cleansed of Indigenous peoples, in that we still can see where Indigenous peoples were deposited into Indian territory, which became like Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. And so we can see the outcomes of the ethnic cleansing policies of the United States. And so that has also interfered with our ability to understand kind of the deep human story of each space in some way. And so I mentioned at the beginning, that respect, revitalization, and reconciliation are really important acts that we need to do, considering the complex history of this space and the many kind of upheavals that have happened in this space. And so just thinking deeply about respect of treating these Indigenous nations as sovereign entities and respecting them as any government, doing our best to understand our shared history with them, and thinking the ways we can contribute toward Indigenous language, culture, revitalization, as we want to continue to transmit this knowledge that has been carried forward by so many people for so long. And then we do need some reconciliation work, considering the kind of upheavals that have happened along the way and the impacts and outcomes of ethnic cleansing here in the state of Wisconsin, or reservation, or assimilation, or the many kind of policies that were harmful to Native Americans. And then lastly, we can practice individually the 4 R's of respects, relationships, reciprocity, and responsibility, and relevance that's sometimes used in that one. But once again, we're doing our homework to understand the Native nations. We're thinking about long-term relationships with them. We're thinking about reciprocal relationships with them, like the efforts that we're doing with them. We're not only benefiting from our activities, that the Indigenous nations themselves are benefiting from our partnerships in some way, shape, or form. Responsibility speaks to whenever sensitive cultural information is shared with us, that we'll be good stewards of that information or data. And then relevance is a piece that hopefully the work that we're doing with Native nations is a priority for them, and not just a priority for us as a non-Indigenous community. So just kind of reminding us about the 4 R's that we can practice in thinking about the complex shared history and the specialness of this place. And we, as the University of Wisconsin-Madison, have been working to highlight the specialness of place through Teejop Residence Hall. We asked the Hooçak Nation to name a hall for us. The name Teejop was offered, and that became one of our newest residence halls. And it features some of the effigy mounds that are conical, linear, and effigy mounds of campus are represented throughout the building. And so it's a place of acknowledging the 12,000-year story of this space. The Hooçak Nation have been partnering with the institution in different ways. We have Hooçak Nation Plaza at the institution, and reminds us of the Indigenous nation that was here long before the creation of the institution. And so with that, I just have a little bit of time, but I wanted to provide a little chance to answer any questions if people have any questions to ask. But I just wanted to share a little bit about the incredible specialness of Teejop. It's an extraordinary place with thousands and thousands of years of human story, many, many different layers of society here. And then importantly, we still have so many of these amazing artifacts and cultural expressions that were created thousands of years ago that we can continue to learn from in some way. And so, I count myself just a very blessed person to live here in Teejop, considering how special and extraordinary of a cultural center it has served for such a long period of time. And it gives me great joy to know just the specialness that humans have cared for this land, have really connected to this land, and have stewarded this land in ways that tried to enhance the living world around them. That all these living beings, the wild rice that used to be in the 4 lakes, the incredible flora and fauna of this place, that Indigenous peoples were doing their best to ensure that all living beings of this place had a high quality of life. So I thank you for allowing me to join you today for a little bit and sharing about the extraordinary cultural center of Teejop. and just how we as a university community are learning to leverage this place for teaching and learning of our own community, considering the goals we have for students by the time they leave our institution. So as the Hooçak would say, a respectful thank you is wa'inagenapshana for allowing me to share this information with you today. And I hope you have a deep appreciation for Teejop in ways that maybe you didn't have before, or maybe it's just reaffirmed some knowledge you've held before, or maybe it's been some new information that you're going to take time to process. But wa'inagenapshana, thank you for your time and energy for joining us today.
Aaron, thank you so much for that. And I think a deep appreciation is an understatement. And I think you hit the nail on the head, at least for me, taking some time to reflect on this. I mean, really brought to light how little I really knew about this land and the indigenous folks who had first settled here. There were a handful of questions that did come in. So this one is thanking you for the presentation, and that it states that I know you mentioned the canoe that was just recovered. It's estimated to be 1,200 years old, ? What else have they found out about it? So I don't know if you know much about the.
No, it's Wisconsin Historical Society is the lead party who is handling the preservation, because the preservation process for the canoe is going to last like 3 years. So the canoe was just retrieved. An archaeologist had located the dugout canoe. The Hooçak similarly do dugout canoes, part of their culture as well. They're in the process of creating new dugout canoes even today, as a kind of reminding that incredible knowledge and technology that their ancestors had created that long ago. And so, yeah, the dugout canoe, we have some very brief and new information about it, meaning, the radiocarbon dating techniques that kind of situate and allow us to know it's 1,200 years old. But once again, it's now going to enter a preservation process that is lasting 3 years. And so there'll be a lot of information gleaned from this research of this wonderful cultural object and technology. The canoe culture of the Great Lakes itself is so wonderful for us to kind of benefit and grow and learn as a community as we understand how humans have called this place home over time. So the kind of research and understanding of this canoe is just beginning and will last for years to come.
Thank you for that. This next one comes from Carol. Are there any books you might recommend about the Hooçak Nation and history?
Yeah, there's a really great visual history. It's a really kind of a really transitional moment in Hooçak world called People of the Big Voice. It's a series of the Van Schaick collection of photographs of Hooçak people. And it has some really wonderful essays by Hooçak scholars, Tom Jones, Lone Tree, Professor Lone Tree, history professor. And so it's a wonderful, not only kind of representation of the culture of the Hooçak, but it also has some really insightful essays within it, kind of explaining kind of clan systems or kind of worldviews of the Hooçak. So People of the Big Voice is just a wonderful text to kind of learn about the Hooçak. There are other books like Mountain Wolf Woman, a Hooçak childhood, which is designed for young readers, but is really informative of kind of a Hooçak world as well. Lastly, there are emerging a lot of new dissertations, and these will be a little harder to locate, but Libby Tron's Corn Moon Migrations, Amy Rosebrough's Effigy Mound dissertation. We have a website at the University of Wisconsin-Madison called the Our Shared Future website. So oursharedfuture.wisc.edu is the website, and it has all these materials collected in one place. And so there'll be a lot of primary resources to learn about the Hooçak, as well as kind of the treaties that were established with the Hooçak in Wisconsin, and as well as some links to some of the dissertations. So I invite everyone to go to the Our Shared Future website at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it's really speaking to this shared history we have with Indigenous peoples and the future we're going to create with Indigenous peoples. So the Our Shared Future website has wonderful resources that people can check out. There's also wisconsinfirstnations.org. wisconsinfirstnations.org was designed for K-12 educators to fulfill the expectation to teach the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of Native Americans at least once in high school and twice in elementary school.
Thanks for that. I had a viewer beat me to it. I was trying to put the Our Shared Future link in the comments, but they went and posted that. So thank you for that. Aaron, you touched on a handful of things towards the end of the presentation. And always, I'm always, when I learn about items such as this, especially through the lens of historical preservation, what would you say is maybe the single most important thing that myself or any lay person could do to aid in the preservation or sharing of knowledge of this land and the folks who first inhabited it?
I think, a lot of people started with the idea of land acknowledgements, but land acknowledgements can be really hollow. And so land acknowledgements can be very challenging if they don't come with commitments. And so the most important part of a land acknowledgement is the commitments we're willing to make to enhance the well-being of Indigenous peoples, nations in some way. So I think about the areas that we work in or the areas we involve ourselves in, whether they be our work, our after work activities, our hobbies. If you think about what you're passionate about and the areas you can invest your energy in, you think about ways, well, what do I do that could enhance the well-being of Indigenous nations and peoples? Not in a paternalistic or condescending way, but, I have these skills, resources, and assets. How might they improve the kind of situation of Native Americans or well-being of Native Americans? And so I think the things that we have to ask ourselves are, what commitments are we willing to make ourselves to interrupt settler colonialism? Some of it can just be self-education. I should read People of the Big Voice. I should read Indian Mounds of Wisconsin, 2nd edition by Roseborough of Birmingham. There are many different kind of ways we can make commitments to ourselves, but then thinking, well, how can I support Indigenous nations and peoples in some way? And another way one can do that is by visiting Indigenous nations and peoples. And so powwows are social events that one invites the whole world to join Indigenous communities, and powwows have been interrupted by the pandemic. They kind of sporadically happened last summer. Hopefully next summer is a little better. But it's a time when Indigenous nations are welcoming people to their community. And Indigenous peoples, I just hope people want to know them and make new friends. And so it's a thinking deeply about the work we need to do to educate ourselves about settler colonialism, the impacts of settler colonialism on Indigenous peoples, and the ways that we can contribute toward their well-being, considering the many outcomes of colonization that have impacted Indigenous peoples. So, that do your homework. There's a lot in the public domain we can do, and then think about what commitments you can make in the areas of work or hobby that are important to you. And that kind of reflection exercise can help us think about building long-term healthy relationships with Indigenous peoples.
Thank you for that. Well, that concludes all the questions that have come in. Aaron, again, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today. Really great session. A lot of information that I'm going to go and mull and think back over. One last question that did come in, though. There appeared to be just a few errors with some of the slides. Someone asked if there's any way that you might be able to share the slides with some folks?
Yeah, I could turn it into a PDF somehow, but it's a very large file because of the graphics within it. And so I think the streaming technology was having a hard time with the kind of graphic load that I think it's like I can't email it. It's too big to email. And so I have to always put it somewhere and have access to it. So I can I can convert it to a PDF and share it with you, Andy.
Sure. And then I can go ahead and send it to the folks, to the email that they use to register. So thank you for that, Aaron.
Yeah, and I appreciate Steve Holtzman talking about, asking schools to fulfill the Act 31 mandates. And that was that expectation to teach the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty at least twice in elementary, at least once in high school. Since that's an unfunded and unenforced mandate, some schools skip it. Some schools do wonderful, innovative work. Prescott High School, Black River Falls, Bowler Elementary, some really exciting schools that have taken this to a really high level of integrated teaching and learning. But some schools, for whatever reason, haven't engaged that material as deeply. And so one can encourage schools to teach the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of Native nations, which is a state statute.
So, again, thanking everyone for taking the time out of their day to tune in and joining us. We're again, very much looking forward to continuing to learn and grow and dream together, and that you can learn more about upcoming DreamBank events and content designed with your dreams in mind at our website, which is amfam.com/DreamBank. And by connecting with us on our social channels, probably on our Facebook page, which is where you're viewing this today. On behalf of American Family Insurance and DreamBank, we look forward to hosting you again. Until next time, dream fearlessly, and we will see you all then.